Hi people, how you doing? We're live. Welcome to the Sports Therapy Association podcast, episode 201. Doesn't that sound fantastic? Wonderful. My name's Matt Phillips, creator of RunChatLive.com, and as always, this episode is being recorded live on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel, and also, for those of you who prefer, on Facebook page. Before we start, are you an STA member who would like to be on this podcast? It's a great way to share your knowledge and to raise your profile amongst other therapists and clients. It looks great on your CV, whether it's you're giving that to maybe renting something at a clinic, or whether you're looking for more clients. And I ask this because on the first Tuesday of every month, for those of you unaware, we do a Ask Us Anything episode, which is basically where we get a panel of Sports Therapy Association members to answer questions sent in by listeners. And we haven't done it. I think we missed out 1 month, but on Tuesday, July the 2nd, at 8 o'clock. The topic is going to be therapy for swimmers. So if you are an STA member and you'd like to be on that panel, because you do work with swimmers and you've got some experience, I'm going to hold my hand up, probably about 7 swimmers in 10 years, then email me. That's because they were triathletes. Email me, matt@thesta.co.uk. And even if you're not sure that you want to be on it, but you're kind of tempted, then email me as well, and we can have a little discuss, maybe even a Zoom call we've had before, what it entail, and then maybe you'll get the confidence to come on it. Right, so recently we concluded a 3-part series on tendons, all available on your preferred podcast app, and tonight we're starting a 2-part special on movement. I'm slightly concerned because nobody's actually joined the live feed yet. I'm wondering whether that's because I've done something wrong. We'll continue and we'll see. I can edit this. I'm just wondering whether I press that button or not. But anyway, so yeah, we're going to start a 2-part series on movement. And in part 1, my special guest coming up very shortly will be John Scriven, founder of MoveWell, who is a natural movement and rehabilitation specialist with a passion for helping individuals achieve physical literacy. Next week in part 2 at 9 o'clock, because once again, my guest is going to be joining us from Australia. My guest is going to be Stephen King of MATassessment.com, where MAT stands for, you guessed it, Movement Assessment Technologies. Stephen will be talking to us about movement assessment, the latest research, and how this helped him create his movement assessment tool, aptly named the MAT. That'll be part 2 next week, but for now it's part 1 of our movement special entitled MoveWell Physical Literacy, with my special guest, who I should bring up now, John Scriven. Hey John, how you doing?
Hi Matt, nice to see you.
Isn't it wonderful when there's no technical problems at all? It's lovely, isn't it? Life just shows technology is all good, nothing bad about it at all. Anyway, so thanks for joining us and giving up your time. For listeners who didn't see you at Therapy Expo last year, which we might mention a little bit at the end as well, because I believe you're going to come along to Therapy Expo this year, November, which will be fantastic to see you again. Could you give us a little summary of your background and how MoveWell ended up being?
Yeah, so I was quite fortunate to grow up in, well, for all the Brummies out there, I was quite fortunate to grow up in Southern Coalfield, next to Southern Coalfield Park. It's a 2,000-acre park, and I had 3 brothers. So we were outside pretty much permanently, and in that park, I fell in love with movement. And we would go through the park, you know, up in the morning and back when the lights came on at night, all day, every day, exploring, climbing, building bases, just doing what, you know, good 80s kids did, and, you know, really exploring the environment and movement being shaped by environment. So I loved that, and that really set the tone. My brother was a national 400-meter runner, so I used to see him training, and what a wonderful, you know, sort of mentor that was. So I got him very interested in the type of training that he did, and started an athletics kind of journey while I was still in Birmingham. Then moved to Jersey when I was in my mid-teens, and kind of got involved with squash and rugby, and then back into athletics, and myself became a national 400-meter runner, and not a brilliant one, but, you know, reasonably competitive at club level. And yeah, from there, just really fell in love with coaching, you know, typical routes, or sport and exercise science and physiology, undergraduate, postgraduate human performance, which kind of really specialised in rehabilitation and S&C, became accredited S&C coach, and have been so for 16 or 17 years now. And sort of in between that, working in various different roles within movement. So some personal training work, some internship around S&C, and various different sports involvement, and dipping my toe into coaching at that time as well. So I, from there, interned with a gentleman who was running a small high performance unit in Jersey, and sort of got my first taste of, reasonably good national level, county level S&C coaching, really, for a large part. And I did all the donkey work on the research and kind of setting up the gym and doing all the stuff, cleaning, and then taking a little bit more responsibility. But again, continued falling in love with that. And from then, I managed to bag myself a job in a prison as a manager, head of physical education. And that was an eye-opener, and went down that route. And we had a large rehab unit, which was really looking at shoulder pain and lower back pain, particularly for heroin users. And that causes an absolute myriad of issues skeletally. So we had a physiotherapist working in there, a number of rehab trainers, alongside the other physical education and physical activity programs that we ran. So that was a big eye-opener, and fell in love with the rehab side. And I've just kind of continued from there, really. And I ended up moving from there into having my own business for a little while. Then from that, there was another opportunity came up to manage a bigger high performance program in Jersey, which I started as a senior S&C coach. I had a small team. Took that from being part-time to having 6 full-time sports scientists and two doctorate psychologists and physios working for me there, which was cool. And we worked with, at any one time, about 150 athletes across 18 different sports. And I think I counted with one of my old coaches that we'd worked with over 1,000 athletes, all at national level and above, from junior all the way to masters level athletes, for over 15 years. So that was kind of my main bread and butter, going through all the different stages and processes, different roles, and ended up managing the whole program for 7 years. And then through that, I kind of came so predominantly in sort of high performance and high performance rehab. But as the last 5 years happened, I suddenly grew a little bit tired of the one-dimensionalness of S&C coaching. And we'll talk about how that pertains to movement therapy and rehab in a second, particularly when working with younger athletes. And I recognized that there was a real problem, particularly in the last 10 years, around movement poverty and a lack of real movement skill, or what I call movement nutrition, or physical literacy, we might call it another way. And so I went down a road of kind of looking at what does movement actually mean outside of S&C. And S&C do a really good job, by the way, of movement. I'm not saying there's in isolation there's a problem. They do a really good job at what they do. But when we're not talking about, an athlete, high performance athlete that's tweaked a hamstring, and we're trying to rehabilitate that, versus, someone that doesn't have the capacity to achieve activities of daily life, it becomes quite a different story and a different problem to solve. And I just fell in love with general movement and studied a lot under Ido Portal, Alan Lacour, athletic skills model, René Wahlberg up in the Netherlands. Just a whole range of Dr. Margaret Whitehead, a whole range of people. I've been very fortunate to study under, and I used sort of 5 years as a big literature review and immersion into just wider movement away from sport. And it opened my eyes completely to the things that perhaps I was getting wrong previously. And here we are now, into the world of movement therapy and physical literacy coaching.
So out of interest, just to take you back a little bit, you were working with a huge amount of athletes, all different levels and up to very elite levels. What was it that caused you to step back and in your own way say this is a bit like kind of one-dimensional? Was it you weren't getting results, or was it that your heart just wasn't in it, or what made you step back?
I recognised that we were surfing athletes at this level, and they tweak a hamstring, and we fix that hamstring. They go back off to the coach, and there's a real disconnect between what that athlete actually needs from a broad base of movement, which if you think about, performance being a pyramid, and the pyramid can only be as high as the base is wide. So what we were doing, we're actually in quite narrow columns almost in terms of athletes' general movement skills were quite narrow, stacking. It was an inverted pyramid, so they had quite narrow movement skills and very wide specialist skills. And we were fixing those specialist skills, getting them back on the track, and they would re-break, and they would re-break, and they would re-break. And effectively didn't have the capacity and the skill set to be able to tolerate higher levels of training because the base isn't wide enough. And particularly for youth athletes, I mean, that was with the senior athletes, but with the youth athletes, we were effectively encouraging more specialization. And that was my biggest frustration with it. Young athletes need to have variation, not specialization, in my opinion. And we were doing them a disservice that we weren't developing an athlete or human-centric model. It was a sport-centric model that was focused on results. And those individuals would either leave the sport and become sedentary because of a lack of physical literacy that should have been developed where the sport was developing sports specialist skills at a stage where it's really important they develop well-rounded movement skills. And then later that reared its ugly head because it reared its head as underperformance. Why can't this athlete produce better performances? We're adding more and more load onto them. Come on, you should be getting better. This is they don't have the fundamental skill set to sit behind and the capacities to tolerate that. So they break. And it's ultimately one of the problems with Western sport is that compared to Eastern sport programs, I was quite fortunate to study the Soviet Union and the Chinese systems have a very, very different approach to athlete development, which is very much more around becoming a specialist generalist at a younger age, where we specialize. You get quick results at junior level performances, but we often find that we get early dropout, burnout, and lots of injury at senior stages. So that's kind of what I was seeing at the adult level. And then I felt in my heart that I was probably doing the wrong thing for those athletes at a junior level. But my job depended on me getting results. Mm-hmm. So you got this balance between doing the right thing, the ethical and moral things for young people, which you can't really measure that easily, and it doesn't show its benefits until maybe 10 years down the line, versus getting quick results and showing that we can get this athlete moving a little bit quicker in a specialized role. So I was at a real ethical and moral debate in my gut about what was right. And I started finding that my training moved quite a lot away from that. And then I wasn't really being a high performance coach anymore. I was just being a movement coach. So that's where I think the divergence happened.
It's interesting because, and this is, well, I should just jump in here and say that the reason you're not going to hear any questions at the moment tonight, I think it's been a technical problem, which worries me a little bit, because I think me and Johnny are going to get a little bit deep and just talk. It could be a total new, interesting, different experience for you, the listener. But yeah, if you don't hear it being broken up by questions, it's because we've had some technical issue. But anyway, and I've just got to remember now that this is actually going out for listeners and not just for me, because it's so interesting what you're saying, John. But anyway, I've just thrown away my metaphorical crib sheet, and I'm just listening to you now and reflecting. So I wonder whether, because we've talked about this before on the show, a lot of clinicians who, you were working with a lot of athletes, you had actually quite a nice large sample population to reach that conclusion, to actually get a more accurate idea of what was working, what wasn't working, what your success rate was, and that sort of stuff. And you also had people breathing down your neck, reminding you every time it didn't work. And I worry whether one of the reasons why this system does work for sole clinicians or small clinic practices is because we do tend to just remember the times things do work, and we don't keep a tally of the clients where things don't work or they don't come back and see us. We kind of brush that under the carpet, don't we? So, and it's nothing against clinicians, because it's probably a very human characteristic, but we only remember the good times. So we really do believe that our clinic is thriving, that we're building our business and everything's great, when really a lot of us, if we did write down the times when things haven't worked out and the client hasn't got better or the client hasn't come back, then we'd realize that, I don't know, it could even be like 50-50 or something, people getting better and people not. And if people had the reflection and the accurate kind of data to show what you just said, then I think a lot of people would be a little bit disheartened, which might not be such a bad thing, because I start thinking, you know what, something I'm doing here is wrong, something's not working. But you reached that because of the situation you're in, and you must have been quite a brave step of going, you know what, I've got to pull away here and do something different because I'm not being true to what I'm saying I'm offering. It's quite brave. I commend you for it.
I think we were forced to do it. We had no choice. There's been some really good work out there. Avery Feigenbaum, if anyone's interested in looking at this area, he's done quite a lot of work in youth athlete development. Rodri Lloyd is another one who's done some really good work looking at the needs of youth athletes. One of my mentors, Kelvin Giles, a wonderful, he was head of Australian athletics for 20 years, a guy from Dudley in Birmingham, very, very famous athletics coach in the UK. Also ran the Brisbane Broncos program for 10 years before Dan Baker took over. And Dan Baker is a wonderful S&C coach, very, very funny, a little bit
out there.
Language is interesting, a bit out there, but certainly an old school hardcore S&C coach, which you probably need for working the Brisbane Broncos. But Kelvin took a lot of information from the 1950s and 60s PE curriculum, which he was trained in, and took out to Australia. And he's a big advocate for this, developing the movement vocabulary in young athletes and really giving the capacity and the bandwidth to enhance more ceiling height. I think we increase the bandwidth this way, we can get more ceiling height in sports skill later. So it pushes it up from the bottom, not just pulls from the top, which we're kind of a bit guilty of in the West. For quick results, I call it microwaving. We microwave to get quick results, where slow cooking is the answer. But you just have to be patient to get results. But Rodri Lloyd's done some really good work in trying to help encourage people towards that. Of course, Istan Bali, through the long-term player development model, has done a bit of work in that. There's a whole range of Tudor Bompa, classic periodization guru. He's taken some of the first work from the Eastern Bloc and brought it back into the West around sort of multilateral development of young people. And I took a lot of all this information. I studied Mel Siff, Yuri Vereshchansky, all the stuff from the Eastern Bloc when it came across. Mel Siff's a wonderful text if people want to kind of have a look at some of this work. And they made it work for Western, or they made it understandable for Western coaches, not necessarily that it really worked, but the philosophy made sense. And it makes it very clear why we get lots of injuries. It's great potentially for our businesses.
That's what I'm hoping. So let's get into that. Hopefully people listening are thinking, okay, well, I love this analogy, the pyramid. We're not building that foundation wide enough. It's a lovely idea. I hope it's prepared a few of you to think, okay, well, how am I going to make that base wider? What are we missing out on? And if you could link that to the idea of physical literacy. So presumably it's physical literacy kind of encompasses why we've got such a narrow base.
Yeah. So if we think about a triangle of sport performance, I want people to try and stop thinking about triangle and think more of a rectangle. And the rectangle at the bottom is the same as the old base of the triangle. We're talking about the fundamental ability to move in all environments and all amplitudes and all directions and all skill sets, all biomotor, biodynamic and bioenergetic abilities. So that whole biological basis of movement, which we kind of knew, and that was brought over from the Eastern approaches. But physical, they've retamed that physical literacy now. And that physical literacy piece, if we're looking in a play development model, and we go back to sport just for a second, I'll bring it back into therapy in a sec. That from naught to the sampling years, where we're talking plus or minus 1 or 2 years, depending on whether you're male or female, but let's just say the beginning of secondary school, so it's 11, 12 years old. Those are the physical literacy years, and that's when our nervous system is most plastic to motor skill development. And in plastic, I mean malleable. We're able to, like, we all know that children pick up skills very, very quickly, much more quickly than adults. Now, all things are trainable all the time, but the myelinations of nerves are much easier when they're younger. We have this sort of optimal window of accessibility, particularly things like speed development, upper body strength, which we know is really difficult with modern youth. And particularly young females, it's really difficult to get. And if it hasn't been developed before maturation, it's quite difficult. So this kind of physical literacy piece has the physical component at the beginning, and it has the cognitive component, which is what the old research didn't have, which is the knowledge and understanding about what it means to be a healthy person, happy, in terms of movement and confident. And then we've got the affective piece, which then brings the self-efficacy and the confidence piece. and the daily behaviours around active living and being physically active. Now, from a player development perspective, we say those things need to be done really in the 0 to early teens, really, probably is the right way to look at it. But from a broader physical literary perspective, that stuff's trainable all the time. So we go back to our rectangle rather than the pyramid. We will have a pyramid where people will go through that pathway and choose sport, but we'll have a whole piece of that rectangle, which is the other side of the pyramid, where people don't choose sport, but their enjoyment and participation in physical activity will be greatly enhanced by increasing the bottom of the triangle, the width of it. So the area above that is much bigger. It'd probably be easier for me to draw this, and maybe I can put a link to that where people can have a read of this later on. So we're still growing that base of physical literacy skills, so people can go out and enjoy physical activity or sports performance and segue between the two if they want to, without getting injured and being broken. But let's just park sport now, just leave that for a second, because I want to bring it right back into movement coaching and what we can do as therapists working in maybe a non-sport environment. And a physical literacy piece gives people that confidence to move. And the more confident they can move, the more physically active they'll be, the more skill sets and more tools they have to move, the different types of ways and different types of environments they'll be active in. So what we're asking them to think about is grow that base of movement, and then people will have more capacity and more resilience to injury. So it's kind of like a prevention perspective. But even when we think then about from an injury perspective, how do we rehab an injury and try to stop that injury from coming back again? So actually, we never want them really to necessarily come back through our doors, because we want to do such a good job that they had the knowledge and understanding and the confidence and the competence to go out there and enjoy their sport, enjoy their physical activity without the fear of being re-injured. So this comes back into, well, what does physical literacy training look like? And this is the difficult piece where I think I have some of the answers, but not all of them. And this operational or operationalizational, I can never say that word, making physical literacy operative is really difficult. And the jury's still a little bit out about how you do that. But I've kind of gone down a bit of a natural movement route. And it's kind of provided some of the answers. I've taken some samples from neurodevelopmental theory, some from evolutionary theory, some from athlete development theory, some elements just from ecological systems, which has been quite interesting, kind of blended it all together. And then some elements from my strength training background and the functional training background, which are all, really cool. And so to come up with a system that I think works quite well. And yeah, I'm happy to talk about that if that's interesting, Matt.
No, that's great. I mean, I'm interested as well to link it to, because so far I'm putting myself in the position of the listener, and also I'm going through my own kind of protocols when I get a runner coming to me who's injured, and a lot of it kind of links over. And we talked about this on the other episode you were on. I should point out to people, actually, if you want an introduction to the term physical literacy, then back in episode 177 in December, John was also a guest on the show. So there's a whole hour dedicated to it there, which you may well find interesting to listen to as well. But I think we drew back then a comparison between the physical literacy and the kind of emergence of biopsychosocial, because the idea of biopsychosocial is you're kind of widening that foundation by considering the psychosocial factors as well, which could be in a modern interpretation connected to pain. But I remember even back then you said that you identified some limitations of the biopsychosocial. So I'm interested for listeners out there thinking, well, I already kind of do this. I know that we don't just concentrate on that hip, which is giving them pain. I'm concentrating on everything else, the psychosocial side of it. What else are you implying that needs to be added to that base, which isn't covered by a consideration of the psychosocial factors?
Well, from a pain science perspective, I think the biopsychosocial model is really good. And that's typically how we learn that model is around pain science. I think it goes much broader than just pain science, the biopsychosocial model. So I'm not discounting that. I use it every day and really, really love it. Physical literacy sort of works and segues inside the biopsychosocial model. It just makes us think a little bit more about the knowledge and understanding piece. So there's that psychological piece to, or the cognitive piece, I should say, to physical literacy. and then you have the
explain that for me as well. What do you mean by the cognitive piece of this?
Because it's educating patients and educating people on the value of movement, how to move, the broader context of movement. Okay. So it might be looking at movement from an evolutionary perspective. So when we look at, what really motivates someone to move or change their behavior, it's not just about giving them the skill set, like this is how you do, I don't know, a tripod transition, for example, from the ground. Mm-hmm. Why is that important? How would you use it? What kind of systems might you use it in, and give them the understanding and awareness of like a constraint or an ecological context about how you might actually use that in real life. And then they'll be much more motivated to use it, as opposed to just saying, right, we're going to do a Nordic curl, or this
so we're talking about facilitating behavior change, because we know that non-compliance of exercise is an issue, and we blame the clients when they don't do the exercises. So if we use more of this approach, they grasp why it's important.
Yeah, we talked a little bit, I think, at Therapy Expo last year about being a facilitator, not a dictator. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really important piece. So that teaching aspect to physical literacy and the knowledge and understanding, that cognitive piece is absolutely vital. But it doesn't mean that, the confidence piece, the effective piece about self-worth and how we value ourselves is equally as important. So building up their confidence and through skill sets, through knowledge, understanding, and programming in a way that is graded, that makes it feel fun, and sort of maybe reconnects to a type of movement that they connect with, as opposed to something that is coach or therapist centered, and making it patient centered is essential to do that. And then there's obviously the physical competency piece that links into that. So this is the system of movement of which you choose to use. And we've gone through many systems of movement over the last 100 years of physical education and physical fitness development. Most latterly, we've probably come through the functional training era, and now we're probably moving into the strength training era from what it feels like. I see a lot of S&C stuff worming its way into the therapeutic world, which is fine. And yeah, I mean, so that pathway, and we could talk about how I approach that. I'm not sure. Did that was that okay in terms of answering what you meant by that, Matt?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I'm just interested in showing listeners that really what you're talking about, I think, as I take it, is it's about tweaking what they're already doing and adding slightly to it, or just changing the weights of what you're doing. Because a lot of the time, a lot of new systems come along with new acronyms and things, and it kind of suggests their power is suggesting to the therapist, you've been doing it wrong till now, and this is the new revolutionary thing. But I want to make it clear, obviously that's not the case with you, and you are drawing from little bits of lots of different systems that kind of work, but when you're dealing with a human being, it's how you weigh them and put them together that can get you better results. So
yeah, I mean, maybe I can put it in a different way. This is it's quite a it's hard to wrestle this physical literacy piece, but it's so interesting. So if we look at a lot of the movement systems that we've used are quite specialized movement systems. So if we look at the S&C industry and the influence that's having on therapy, it's really good, but it's very, very specialized. So when we talk about, we might use a Nordic curl for hamstring capacity, which is really, really common, very on vogue at the moment. A Nordic curl gets you better at Nordic curls. It does. It builds tissue strength. How much variability of tissue strength and skill does it give us? Does it give us much skill? It doesn't. It's really focusing on a capacity in isolation, or what we might call a biomotor ability in isolation. And that would be one of my challenges to S&C and how it applies to the physical literacy of our patients. Because remember, we go back to that rectangle. At the bottom of the rectangle, it's incredibly general movement, multilateral development. As we go up, it becomes more and more specialized, And S&C works incredibly well for individuals that are, particularly as a senior S&C, historically it's worked very well for individuals who are already very, very good at their sport. And youth S&C isn't necessarily that. Youth S&C should be more of a sort of middle ground between the two. And the challenges with isolatory development, and we might still be talking about compound lifts, for example, but it's still a biomotor skill in isolation. We're training strength, or we're training power, or we're training speed, or we're training reactivity, or maximal force, RFD, that type of stuff. But it's still in isolation. It's to make that individual who's already well trained have potentially more output in a certain area. Whereas if we're thinking about, you know, a client who wants to go out and walk on the beach safely and I don't know, reduce the fear of falling over, for example. Well, clearly maybe a physical literacy skill set might not be to worry too much about getting really, really strong. It might be about, well, can they operate and walk safely on an uneven surface, for example? Do they have the ability to absorb a fall and have the technique to do so? I'm not saying that, you know, them improving their bench press might not make their shoulders more stable. It would do. But I'd like to say, you know, can they get back off the ground okay? Do they have the bandwidth to be able to get off the ground without using their arms, for example, and do it in 3 or 4 different ways rather than, I don't know, one way? Are they able to stand up off the ground in an unsupported manner in 4 or 5 different ways? Because we have no idea how they're going to fall. So although I like to improve people's strength, there's a huge skill side piece that the typical S&C approach doesn't work. I mean, the squat, although it's a complex skill, it's just one movement, and it's really, really good at doing what it's designed to do. It's a very efficient at making someone very, very strong. Has some great outcomes in bone mineral density, the reduction in osteopenia, really, really important for elderly people. Cool. I still use it all the time. I'm not bashing it at all. I'm just saying it's quite one-dimensional. So when we look at tissues, and I like mechanotherapy, mechanotransduction, like looking at actually what the tissues really need to exist to be healthy, what they were naturally made for, the shearing forces, the distraction forces, the compression forces, the 360-degree movement, the multiplanar activity, and we're just talking about still biomotor abilities there. Then think about biodynamics. Are we covering those bases? And that's what physical literacy is. Now, it sounds really complicated. It's not. It's giving people confidence to move how they were designed. So I like to look at, you know, can they roll? Can they do, I don't know, a forward roll potentially? Can they balance? Can they walk on different surfaces? Can they get up and down off the ground doing transitions? Can they sit on the ground without cramping, for example? Are they able to watch television for 5 minutes without using the couch? Can they get up out their office chair in different variations of movement? So adding variety to their movement diet is really important at a physical literacy level. Whereas at a more specialized level, it's about focusing on macronutrients of movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So both is important. And to the listeners who are thinking, God, that sounds really scary, it sounds hectic. Well, what I'd ask you to do is, you know, if you've managed to rehabilitate a hamstring on the couch, can we get them off and do some balance work with them? Can we get them off on one leg and look at doing some basic arabesques? You know, these things are quite basic. They can be stabilized quite easily. They're working the hamstring function the way the body was designed to move, particularly in a, not even a sport-specific mode, in a movement-specific mode. Most of our walking for a hamstring, you know, is multi-joint work where we've got negative foot speed. I don't know whether the listeners will be familiar with that, but when we plant our foot on the ground, our hip comes over our foot doesn't go backwards. So doing things like hamstring curls, you know, is part of capacity development, but it's not that specific to the imposed task, which might be walking or jogging. So, you know, we're actually doing some basic walking or marching drills and adding variability to that and giving them elastic and reactive skill sets that will help them rehabilitate better towards moving more naturally. And that's kind of where I'm at with physical literacy. It's given the skill sets to move how they'd like to move and given options.
So do you think, again, it depends, therapists will operate differently. And I mean, during the tendon, for example, the tendon special, we're talking about kind of protocols. It came up into topic that the guidelines for how to treat a tendinopathy, wherever it is, they're not recipes. They're not something you should follow from step 1 all the way through. I mean, all of the specialists kind of said they're just kind of guidelines, and ultimately it depends on the individual in front of you as to whether you start at 1 or start at 3 or maybe go back to 2. So, but in terms of providing guidelines, traditionally we kind of think, right, more isolated, restore maybe the high load capacity, and then maybe move into the plyometric or the reactive stage for the tendon. And then we tend to see end stage rehab where the sport or the movement itself, let's say a runner, for example, that becomes part of the rehab. And we kind of got this idea the body is then able, it's got enough capacity with regards to the load, it's got to deal with regards to the, for example, the elastic properties of the tendons. Then we can start using the actual activity itself. Are you kind of suggesting that earlier on in rehab, if not from the very beginning, we should be putting it more into context, making sure that we are introducing elements like fun and realist and education and making it more natural, I guess, rather than following this kind of more safe, less safe back to sport protocol?
Wow, that's going to be yes is my short answer to that. The long answer is this, that I'm absolutely saying that it depends on the severity and the acuteness of the injury, of course. So if you're in a bleeding inflammation phase, it's maybe a little bit different, but you can work around a lot of injuries. So I'd always say we need to be making training and rehabilitation fun, because that creates adherence. But I would encourage arenas to read some of Jared Mack's work, who was
they won't do. They're just going to listen to you. That's what we're doing this.
Okay,
yeah, you tell us.
Jared Mack was in the 70s, was a really forward-thinking rehabilitation therapist that worked with Charlie Francis, which was Ben Johnson's coach. So for readers that don't remember Ben Johnson, fastest man alive, got caught for drugs, blah blah, big massive thing about it. But Charlie Francis was, apart from the drug use, was well ahead of his time, and a lot of the stuff that he was doing then is still only just being unearthed now. So what they would do for an athlete that had strained a hamstring, he would make this argument that said, well, if someone came down from outer space and said, right, you're going to rehabilitate that hamstring, and that person's got to go and do in 6 weeks' time a sprint, depending on the severity of the hamstring or what type of grade of strain is, and they've got to go and run 100 meters in 9 seconds. And we're doing Nordic curls. I mean, they weren't called Nordic curls then. We're just doing some isolatory stuff or whatever it was. They say they're mad because everything's scalable, right? So actually, when you look at the biodynamic similarities of sprinting to Nordic curl, they're so far different that one of the problems with doing that type of work, and I think this is, I need to dig out the evidence on this, and forgive me, it's just probably, I'll say this off memory. But I'm not sure, and I think there was a paper just recently about Nordics and hamstring rehabilitation that actually it wasn't that effective and potentially caused more injuries than it's supported. But you look at a sprint, for example, or even a jog, how fast that is compared to something like a Nordic curl or isolated hamstring work, or even just some P&F work on the hamstring. The biodynamics are so different. We're having to prepare someone for putting up to 4 times their body weight through the leg. If they're jogging, maybe 6-7 times their body weight through a leg if they're sprinting. Usain Bolt puts it through in 0.09 of a second. That's incredibly fast. And we thought some of our slowest runners might be doing it in less than a second. Are we really rehabilitating that injury? Are we, regression to the mean, so a large part there? Are we just kind of facilitating, is that scar going to be that functional? So they would have them doing supported walking drills almost immediately, depending on the level of up to grade 2, walking drills almost immediately, progressing to drill-based work, again depending on the severity, progressing to hill-based tempo runs, progressing to hill-based sprints, progressing to short accelerative runs, progressing to controlled distance high velocity runs, progressing to full length runs. And that, in combination with soft tissue work, was a really effective protocol that a lot of that sprint program used. And I know that some of the guys in the IS have started using that to great effect. And from a biodynamic perspective, we think about the sequencing of force projection, like how quickly does it work, the type of contractions that are used, the type of forces that are applied in the type of times, and the kinetic chain that's used. It's much more specific. But what you don't do is you don't use a completely different exercise to rehabilitate that. You use the exercise itself, but scale it right back down in terms of volume intensity, right back to the point where they can do it, unless they're completely bedridden. Of course, that's not appropriate. So yeah, Jared Mack, it's interesting stuff. Alva Meal, who's a really great US Hall of Fame NFL coach will use that protocol as well. I know that James Smith does. I'm trying to think of a few others off the top of my head that do it. Ian King, famous Australian strength and conditioning coach, uses that rehab protocol. So food for thought from a biodynamic similarity perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting, but like, okay, so you use the example of like a hamstring. Let's imagine it was a proximal. We were talking a lot about proximal hamstring insertions in the last few episodes because it's a good example of where the research suggests that we have to be careful, for example, of combining tensile and compressive loads on that tendon at the same time too early on, because the research kind of suggests that particularly the proximal hamstring tendinopathy, that it's not going to appreciate the combination of compression and tensile at the same time. So the idea is we do something like a bridge, which, yeah, it's not the same as, it's on purpose, it's not the same as what's happening when you're running, because we're taking out the tensile load. The hip's staying at 0 degrees, there's no kind of tensile load on the hamstring, but you are putting through some load in terms of a non-tensile load. And then once pain has gone down, we normally measure by that, then we might move to something like a Nordic curl, which is then introducing a tensile load on the tendon. Again, it's not similar to running, but when you look at the loads the body's, like you said, the loads that the hamstring is going to have to tolerate when it is running, when it's in swing stance and the hips flexing and the knee is extending, the forces on that hamstring are huge then. So I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here, but I think in order to progress without going too fast, you're going to have to make that exercise non-functional, because if you go functional from the beginning, you're going to expose, it's difficult to reduce the forces without taking away a little bit of the biomechanics of it, of the movement of it. I mean, with walking, for example, yeah, you're not getting such a tensile load on the hamstring, but you're still getting maybe too much for some people. If someone could have a hamstring injury and walking on the flat, it's probably okay, but if you introduce the heel at all, that's going to cause pain. So they're better off on the floor doing a hamstring bridge or something, or doing something like that. So I'm wondering how functional you can be early on without it being too provoking.
Yeah, so we're going down a route quite a lot of quite specific,
Yeah, sorry about that. Because no one answered questions. It's because
I actually
me in here. So.
Which I actually don't do that. But yeah, there's many ways to make that. If we wanted an accelerated rehab approach to that, or we just wanted a really good functional development of that. Now, let's be clear. I'm not a professor of physiotherapy or rehab here, but there are ways of doing that. The pull would be a classic example of offloading that and offloading the tendon really easily. Side lying in supported. So I know that Greg Cook does quite a cool approach to this, and his approach is initially that supported movement. So we find a biodynamically similar movement pattern. So side lying, perhaps taking the leg through the gait cycle, totally offloading all of it. Then you go into a suspended approach. That could be something like the pull, or that could be something like the 𝐼𝐺 gravity treadmill, which would be really effective. Remember the kinetic sequencing of the movement. Most of the hamstring injuries come through, just off the top of my head, not remembering the research off of this a while ago, I looked at. One, dehydration is a massive problem with hamstring injuries. The other one is sequencing and timing issue. And it's interesting you mentioned proximal hamstring injuries. That's where most sprint injuries happen, the proximal head of the hamstring. So you have a timing or fatigue issue. So if the timing's off, we know that can cause hamstring tweaks, particularly with elite level sprinters. And I used to work with 1, 2, and 4 sprinters almost exclusively for 3 or 4 years. And we found that was one of the major problems. A little bit fatigued in training, the hamstring gets tweaked, the timing's off. And we would rehabilitate those pretty much exclusively through offloading but using drills, as opposed to using traditional rehab protocols, which might have used, I like to say, hip bridging. And they still work, and I'd still use that alongside, because I still think there's benefit to improving capacity. I think that's really important.
It doesn't cause them pain. Like I said, they can flex that hip. I mean, to do any, if you've got to do an A, B, or C skip, it's going to involve hip flexion. And for some people with a hamstring tendinopathy, it might not happen when they do it. But if within 24 hours they're complaining again of tenderness, then just flexion of the hip is not going to work. So you've got to go non-functional. But maybe, I don't know, maybe we are being a little bit, like you say, I like the idea of side lying, of water. So basically you're saying that we've really got to make more of an effort on keeping it in context, because addressing the rest of the body, the body really is going to flourish, to use your word, if it's the context is there. Even if we're sidelined, we're still going to make it as similar as possible to the movement.
I'm not against any of that stuff in the acute phase at all. I don't want people to misrepresent me. We use that a lot, but the problem is when you exclusively use that and you chase strength as really the focus, long-term wise, and then we say, okay, well, we're going to progress that, to a deadlift, stiff leg deadlift. We're going to progress that to, I don't know, some sort of low-level plyometric drill. And the problem is, by the time you've got that, you've gone so far away from your sprinting that the time is completely gone. The chance of re-injury is going to be so high. And I don't have evidence I can put in front of you, apart from having worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sprinters and had this problem over and over and over again. So yeah, it's just my take on it. Take it or leave it. But
no. I'm just playing devil's advocate because it's interesting to hear, and it makes a lot of sense. Because one thing we do know, we've talked about as well, is we've talked about with various clinicians and researchers, the incidence of, one of the biggest factors which predicts injury is, have you been injured before? So obviously something we're doing is not working very well, because whatever we're doing is not really hitting the spot.
And I take that one step further, in the fact that, the chance of injury and physical inactivity is based on the lack of physical activity in their physical literacy years, or the key stage development years, which is so important to enhance people's ability to move. So prevention is absolutely essential, and that well-rounded development of movement skill. Because the problem is, you get with an athlete, they become so narrowly specialized that you ask them to do anything else. Like we have like elite level swimmers, and ask them to hop on one leg, and it's like they've never walked before or jumped before. Or you get a sprinter and you put them in the pool and they die. It's quite incredible. So is that sprinter going to be a swimmer when they're older, or are they going to be a sprinter when they leave? Sorry, they're going to swim and enjoy the sea, for example, or they're going to enjoy keeping fit through swimming, which is really brilliant way as we get older to keep fit. Probably not. Those tight, narrow specialisms are self-limiting, and we chase them so hard that we squeeze the fruit so hard to get more and more juice out of it. It's actually in the squeezing that we do damage. And the idea is that actually is become specialist generalists and focus on a broader skill set of capacities and movement skill, and particularly putting the movement skill back into our conditioning, which is really, really important for me. So, like someone, I might have said, I will rehabilitate a hamstring, grade 2 in the intermediate phase, something like that. And I would have done extensively those types of approaches that we talked about before, some isolatory work, some Nordic, some stiff leg deadlifts, some speed skaters, hip extension based work, predominantly sagittal plane hip extension, I guess, great exposure to that. And I'd probably do elements of that still now, but I'd also, I'd like to see that individual get up from the ground without using their hands, because that also includes all those things. But it gives them a skill of movement as well, and it increases that movement bandwidth, so we can make sure that that athlete is being looked after for when they retire from the sport as well as in the sport, but giving them more bandwidth to help stave off injury through their training and enhance their techniques.
I like it, and it's definitely something which isn't really being done at the moment, because it's essentially it's not taught, is it? We're running out of time slowly. But
I've even gone to talk to what I wanted to talk about.
No, this is all so valuable. I promise you, it's amazing. It's going to be a great episode. I like, you kind of touched on it before. I mean, one of my biases is, I think it was because of being a therapist in the kind of the born to run phase, and suddenly everybody saying, oh, barefoot's natural, it's got to be the best way, and the whole appeal to nature fallacy and stuff, and people just taking it the wrong way and thinking that anything that's natural has got to be the best thing, except for tsunamis and kind of poison and stuff like that, which doesn't really help you so much. But I like the link you've alluded to here, where I think I get it, where you promote yourself as a natural, put it there, let's put it, I think I introduced you as this, a natural movement and rehabilitation specialist. When you say natural, basically what you're saying is, let's just incorporate movements that are natural and elements of movement like fun, like getting up from the ground. So it's not a case of, okay, let's just take off all our clothes, run around naked and never wear a shoe again. It's not that, because I think some people see the word natural, maybe at my age, and they feel that's what it's going to be. It's going to be, you know, I mean, that might, for the right individual, be the best rehab
No,
approach,
it's not like, we've not got clubs and running around with all that stuff.
No, it's not. Everyone's got to just eat meat, fertilizer, and no vegetables, because there are elements of that. You've explained it right.
I think there was a big thing around, like, you know, like club bell training and the functional kind of stuff, and
Liver King and that sort of stuff. Yeah,
5 fingers and all that sort of stuff. No, I don't wear any of that stuff. I do spend time, you know, barefoot, maybe because we live in the beach, and also, you know, I want to train my foot musculature just like I do want to train my arm musculature. You know, we know that they're proprioceptually rich. Why wouldn't we spend time? It's healthy for our feet to take our shoes off regularly. I think, you know, I don't have a problem with people wearing high heels. I just don't want them to wear them all the time. You know, let's have variability. Let's have variation and skill set. I want people to have the capacity to do both. So, you know, we might have the office worker come out of the office that can take the heels off and go for a run without, you know, getting discomfort or potentially having stiff ankles. You know, that there is that variability and variation of movement. Adaptability is probably the right word, and capacity there. I don't have a problem with people doing loads of strength training, you know, like I used to do, but don't do it at the sacrifice of a world of other movement skills. You know, for example, I'll tell you a story about Jerome Rattoni, and this will put my point. So Jerome studied with Erwin Lacour, you know, the natural movement guys, and I went to the course that we did. It took a long time to get through this course, but he said, John, you are really strong. And I said, well, I don't really know you. I can tell you are really strong. And I said, oh, what do you mean? How many pull-ups can you do? And I said, oh, well, you know, there's a few people looking, you know, I can do 12 or 13. He goes, wow. He said, how much weight can you pull up? And you go, oh, you know, maybe I can, you know, pull up a 20-kilo kettlebell, you know, as well. He goes, oh, wow. He goes, wow, you are the strongest person here. Well done. He goes, okay, there is a branch there. You do pull up. And I couldn't do one. I couldn't grip it. I couldn't get my weight up on it. He goes, well done. You are so strong, but you are useless. And, you know, classic sort of French approach. And it was a massive, you know, alarm bell for me, is that I was quite strong in the conventional sense. You know, I probably did have good, you know, strong tendons, and I've had good bone mineral density, all the things that modern Western research looks at and says, you know, well done, you know, it's all measurable, great. And he's right, but, you know, practically it's pretty useless apart from doing a pull-up in the gym. So, you know, if I go on the barbell that's got a nice shape to it, that's you know, the pull-up bar that's that wide, I could do that all day long, but I could not grab this tree branch, and I could not climb up. And these guys that were nimble as anything would go, you know, muscle ups, they were just flying up there, and I just struggled. I was exhausted. I couldn't catch my breath. I couldn't even do one. And it was incredibly embarrassing. And it kind of really dawned on me that practicality and adaptability in training is really, really important. You know, that being efficient in movement and sort of unspecialized was the bit that I completely neglected in all my specialized strength training. And as much as I'm not shunning that, I still believe it's important. It is probably the equivalent of jumping out of a boat and hitting water. Strength training is the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to develop. The practical skill sets of being able to interact with our environment in a meaningful way, which is physical literacy, is more of a journey. And that bit is the true answer to a physically active lifestyle. So, you know, if we go back to what that really means, that's, can you get up and down off the ground regularly without using your hands? Can you roll? Can you forward roll? Can we transition between those types of movements? Can we balance? Can we carry different shaped objects and have the skill sets to be able to know how to hold them close, far away? Can we manipulate those objects? Can we carry a person, for example? Are we physical enough to drag a person if we needed to, or drag our own body weight if we fell off something? Are we able to catch, throw, kick? Are we able to swim? Are we able to get in a competitive situation and not feel too threatened? And these practical skill sets have important psychosocial and behavioral and cognitive mental health components, because that's what we've done for 5 million years. Those things I've just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And modern fitness training we've done for less than 100 years. In fact, back in the 60s and 70s with the Cooper Institute, jogging and jazz aerobics was the predominant fitness trend. And we left remedial gymnastics and German gymnastics and Swedish gymnastics, which actually was our original physical education system, for cardiovascular training. So we've kind of gone from being really natural movers to sort of a Renaissance period where we kind of, or the Dark Ages, where we kind of believed in this dualistic approach where the brain and the body were separate, to the Renaissance where we started caring a little bit more about health and fitness, to a period where it was a militaristic type approach, where we had the Revolutionary and First World War, Second World War, gymnastics types approaches came out of that, particularly German gymnastics. The British PE system took on Swedish gymnastics, which was more rhythm-based, more stand, posture, move arms. And then we went to a more aerobic base. So kind of we lost that movement variability piece, that adaptable movement that we were evolved for. Mm-hmm. And then that's where we kind of meet this evolutionary mismatch piece that we've talked a lot about before, which I won't go into too much depth about because we've spoken about it. But that has important biopsychosocial consequences. And we aren't getting the tissue variability, the mechanotransduction, that's really, really important. If we are bench pressing a lot, we're compressing in one plane of motion. That's not good movement variety. It's also not giving us variability of skill set either. It's making us better at pushing something off our chest. It's wonderful for bone mineral density and wonderful if you're a jiu-jitsu athlete and pushing someone off your chest as a primary skill component. It may have a secondary component from a neural amplitude component from a brain perspective, getting more amplitude of signal coming out, efferent signal coming out, but from a skill transfer perspective, very, very little. And as S&C coaches, I think we have to be a little bit more accountable to how much that type of work really makes a difference on the pitch or on the track. Same with actually squats. They're efficient at developing a motor skill, which is maximal strength development. But do they transfer into real life? Do they actually transfer into sport? And again, it comes back to the argument is those people have already really well adapted to their sports. They don't adapt anymore by doing the same thing over and over again. So they have to try something different to get secondary impact from, right? That's why we use the best systems in the world for strength development. We use those power lifts. But for your everyday Joe Bloggs, who isn't an elite level sprinter, that needs to develop a more well-rounded base of movement, that wouldn't be the road that I'd go down now, albeit I wouldn't totally neglect it. There'll be a lot of other things I'd look at as well. So that the macronutrients of movement, we just don't look at protein, fats and carbs in our diet. We also have micronutrients as well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in fitness and rehab, we focus on those macronutrients, which are like strength, power, and also the bioenergetics, so get more aerobic development. But they're all isolationary. How they link to the micronutrients of movement, which is skill set, motor learning, practical and adaptable physical literacy skill sets. So it's blending the two together.
A lot of what you said earlier on, it struck me. And again, it's often what we should be doing sounds obvious when you sit around with a cup of tea and start discussing it. But a lot of the things you discuss is how children learn, the skills they develop. Children don't do squats. They'll give each other piggyback rides. They'll fall over. They'll stand up at awkward angles. They'll take something a bit too heavy and they'll decide not to. And then they'll take, it's like challenging themselves, playing, making it kind of like goal orientated in terms of fun. So maybe a lot of what you've talked about is just allowing adults to train more as kids and doing those sort of things.
I think you've got the motor learning piece, Matt, and then there's the physical element of what you include in your training menu. The how we learn piece is really, really important. I'm quite, I quite like Keith Davis's work on motor learning, where he talks a lot about dynamic systems and constraints-based learning. which is really worth having a look at. Andrew Utley's work on motor learning is really, really good to look at. But yeah, my approach probably is, if we look at using, that's a really nice analogy, and I think we've talked about that before, haven't we? Your children aren't taught to move, they learn. Mm-hmm. They learn because they can't speak English and understand. Their environment is safe, but there's obstacles in their environment, so they adapt to the environment, which is a constraint-based dynamic systems approach, where we make it fun and engaging for them. We facilitate movement. We don't dictate movement because we can't dictate movement. But that software that they're born with exists in all of us. For some of us, we need to de-rust it a little bit, but movement through play and joy and fun is absolutely the environment we want to create to allow people to flourish optimally. So the sort of motor learning control piece is essential to that. So yeah, Keith Davis is kind of the cool stuff to look at on that.
So you've mentioned a lot of names, but what I'm interested in, I know the listeners will be interested in this, if we don't want any Keith Davis or any of these other people, we just want you, John Scriven, to come and show us this stuff. Have you got any plans to do any courses? I hope you'll get you a therapy expert, and we'll try and get you doing some practical stuff. It'd be great. But anything in the pipeline you can talk about, which people can go along to and actually do and start doing this and learning?
Yeah, so I'm in a quite unique position where I've kind of straddled the S&C world, the movement world, which is kind of slightly different from the S&C world, and the therapy world. And I don't think there's many people have really done that. So I have developed a course.
Good, at last.
Day by day, which I am hoping to have live in the new year. And it's a comprehensive movement therapy-based course, which combines all the learning from the S&C years. That a lot of what I talked about today will be in there, and kind of quite tidy snippets, a little bit less than my rambling today. And forgive me, listeners, I tend to go off on one. But trying to kind of wrestle with all that and put it into a system that's really operational. So there'll be theoretical elements, which will be done online. I'm stuck in Jersey, so, flying out isn't always an option for me. But I do want to deliver practically, because the other side is, my big skill sets in the practical development and making it operational. So yeah, a hybrid course, which probably will be 6 to 12 months in duration, but you'll be able to buy sections of it. Good. So if you wanted to look at the evolution of movement, for example, if you wanted to look at that, we wanted to look at motor learning, you could take those sections from it and just do those bits, or you could do it all and there'll be a certificate at the end.
Amazing. So you reckon will people go to Jersey to do it, or would you travel out to Jersey and do a few locations in the UK, or are we still
I think as much as I'd like to think people will come here, we could do it here. No, I'm going to be doing it in the UK, and hopefully some people are interested in doing it further afield. So there's quite a bit of interest in that. It seems
down. That'd be great, because people are listening to you. No, I think you've done very well tonight. I think you're very controlled. You didn't come across as going on at all. But I think part of the attraction of you having met you in person, and hopefully people can feel this from the way you explain things, is you are very passionate about it. You're a great educator. It's very exciting to be in your presence, because you ooze it as you're talking about it, and you're dynamic and moving and discussing things. So it'd be great for people to have that opportunity. You're going to come to Therapy Expo. We've still got to sort out. You're going to be in the hands-on hub, hopefully, with Anna Maria Mazzieri as well, because you did do the level 5 soft tissue therapy with Anna Maria Mazzieri as well. Yep. Just because you were interested in that world as well, weren't you? Such a eternal learner.
Yeah, for me, the movement piece, I don't actually necessarily look at it as a soft tissue therapist or physiotherapist or strength coach. I look at it as a movement specialist. Yeah. And that is the fundamentals. If we get the fundamentals of movement, actually you can operate in all those fields. But I want to make sure that I'm appropriately qualified, that I've got appropriate background and literature and research. And Anna, it was a wonderful course, and Anna's so passionate as well and incredibly evidence-based, and bringing some of the things that Anna has taught me, it will massively complement that, and it will join it up a little bit, and that was a bit I was missing. So yeah, this is going to be cool. I should say, just before we leave, what I'd like the listeners to do is just look at their practice every day and say, how did I learn that? Am I just accepting the current system? Or if I was going to ask my child to design this rehab program, would they design it this way? And there's a famous quote from Charlie Francis that I'll just leave everyone with is, look at the player, not the game. And that game relates to, if we're watching a game of rugby, the game's rugby. If we're looking at a rehab protocol, try to remove yourself from the current ways that we've accepted that everyone else has done, and that's what we've copied. Is if you were going to develop that yourself, is that the way that you would generally do it? And then when you look at the player, if we're looking at the game of rugby, how does that player actually move? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it cutting? Is it what type of energy systems they use? Classic one with rugby that people look at, they do loads of lactic work. Rugby is an alactic aerobic sport predominantly, but yet we hammer them with lactic loads and we wonder why they tweak their hamstrings or why they tweak their groins. It's just inappropriate loading. And let's just step back from it. Forget about everything we know about rugby because we know very little about it. Forget everything we know about football. We know very little about it. Remember, we're in the absolute infancy of rehab. We're in the absolute infancy of physical preparation, S&C, and just step back from it. If you knew nothing and it was you coming out of school, you asked your child to do it, or an alien coming out from outer space, how would they program it? And just have a go without anyone looking on the back of a piece of paper. How would we rehab that hamstring? That would be really interesting. And try just to forget all the conventional wisdom. There's a really great saying. It's no measure of success to be well adapted to a sick society.
Very nice. Did you just hear that pen drop? That was the equivalent of a mic drop.
Oh, yeah.
If you heard that on the podcast, that was like a mic drop. Very nice. I like that. Amazing. Great. So if people are interested, I'll just bring up for people watching on YouTube, I have got a screenshot of the website here. Let's put it on full so people can see it. So we're movewell.je, with the JE standing for Jersey. Natural movement to rehabilitation. So if people want to keep in contact you and want to be notified about these plans you've got for the course, is there somewhere they can sign up on there now, or email you, or what should they do?
I think there's I need to be better on the website. There's a newsletter on there, but I would say, follow the social media stuff. So Instagram and Facebook are my kind of main portals. And the website will be updated as and when those things come live. But we've got a good skeleton for the course now. And I think if I was a practitioner looking at this, starting my journey, that's probably where I'd want to start it.
Excited. Oh, no, it's good. From knowing the short time we've known each other face to face, I'm very excited by it. It's going to be very cool. So on Facebook, if people look up movewell.je, it'll take you there, or you can also look up MoveWell Natural Movement Rehabilitation. Both of them will take you to the Facebook page. Then there is an Instagram one, which is @MoveWellJersey, all one word. People, that's where you can follow John Scriven. It's Scriven, isn't it? Not Scriven. I always say Scriven. It's Scriven, yeah. For some reason, I keep thinking Scriven.
So there we go. People said that.
I don't know why. It just feels wrong inside. But anyway, naturally it feels wrong, but you can't always trust nature. It's not always on the side. But anyway, fantastic. Thanks, John. I mean, it's so amazing. I'm sorry that people couldn't. If you are listening to the podcast and you weren't able to watch this live on YouTube, it's a software issue. I don't know, gremlins in the system. I will find out, but hopefully now you've managed to listen to the podcast or watch the recording on YouTube, which I will stitch together seamlessly. You won't even know there was anything playing around in the system. So next Tuesday at 9 o'clock, if you are listening to this or watching this, it's going to be an hour later because my guest, Stephen King, is once again from Australia. I don't know what it is about Australia this month, or last month and this month. But it's going to be part 2 on Movement Special with Stephen King of MAT Assessment, or MATassessment.com, where MAT stands for Movement Assessment Technologies. That's going to be a great episode. Very excited to talk to Stephen then. So if you want to join us, just head along to YouTube and hopefully it'll be working by then. Or if you prefer, go along to the Sports Therapy Association Facebook page and we will join you then. But for now, normally I would thank everyone who's joined us live, but it's just you and me, John. It's been
good, Mike.
Strange. It's been very strange not having anybody asking questions. But anyway, thank you, John, for your time once again, and look forward to seeing you in November at Therapy Expo this year, whether it's in the Hands-on Hub or the STA Theatre, or hopefully both. It'd be great to see you spreading your good word in person. So thank you very much. Everybody else who's listening to the podcast, do us a favour, please just leave a review. Take a minute out of your busy schedules to, just leave a review. I'll make it easy for you. Just put 5 stars. Don't think about it. Write something very nice, because it just helps us get out to more people. The good word of our guests get out to more people. We want a little bit of a rise now, I'm happy to say. We're going up again, which is nice in the world, but to make a big difference, to take us to more downloads, it's just really you guys sharing it on your social media feeds, leaving that review, and it really will help our industry, essentially. You're going to help our industry more than anyone, more than me, more than John. It's you sharing the good words of our podcast, which will help. So please do that. That's it. Take care, people. And hopefully we will see some of you next Tuesday at 9 o'clock UK time. Bye-bye.